The sound of a fire truck siren is something you never get used to. It's a piercing shriek that cuts through the mundane noise of everyday life and signals chaos, panic, and loss. But as I stood across the street, tucked into the shadows of my neighbor's ancient oak tree, I didn't feel panic. I felt a strange, chilling sense of calm. The red and blue lights washed over the front of my house, the house I'd lived in for 40 years, painting the beige siding in frantic, pulsing strokes of color. Smoke, thick and black, was pouring from the kitchen window, just like I knew it would. Neighbors were starting to spill out of their homes, their faces a mixture of alarm and morbid curiosity. They were pointing, whispering, pulling out their phones. "That's the Adams house," I heard someone shout. "Where's Clara? Is she inside?" I pulled the collar of my jacket up, sinking deeper into the darkness. I was right here, watching the show I had paid for, directed, and produced. Inside that house, a team of firefighters was about to smash down the front door my husband, Mark, had just repainted last spring. And in the master bedroom, on the bed we had shared for 4 decades, they would find him. They would find him with my daughter-in-law, Chloe. And they would discover that the two of them were, for lack of a better term, stuck. If you're watching this, I hope you'll tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'm genuinely curious to see how far a story of betrayal and revenge can travel. Because my story didn't start with fire and sirens. It started with silence. To understand how a 65-year-old woman, a grandmother who owns a beloved local bakery, ended up orchestrating a 5-alarm scandal on her own quiet suburban street, we have to go back 6 weeks. Back to the silence. It had become a permanent resident in our home, thick and suffocating. It sat with us at the dinner table, it watched TV with us in the evenings. And it lay in bed between Mark and me at night, a cold, empty space that had once been filled with warmth. Mark had just gotten home from another one of his late business dinners. He'd been having a lot of those lately. He tossed his briefcase by the door with a heavy sigh that felt a little too dramatic, a little too rehearsed. He loosened his tie like it was a noose he'd been fighting all day and mumbled something about a demanding client. I just nodded from the kitchen, wiping down a counter that was already clean. "Tough day?" I asked, my voice even. "The worst," he grunted, walking past me toward the bedroom. "I'm beat. Going straight to bed." He didn't even make a move to kiss me goodnight. He hadn't in months. But as he passed, I caught it. A smell. It wasn't his usual cologne, that crisp, woodsy scent I'd bought him for Christmas every year since 1995. This was something else. Something cloyingly sweet and floral. It was a young woman's perfume, and it didn't belong in my house. It felt like an intruder, an invisible guest who was mocking me right to my face. A few minutes later, the sound of his heavy snoring started, a rhythmic rumble that used to be a comfort. Now, it just sounded like the engine of a getaway car, speeding away from me and our life together. I was a fool. A 65-year-old fool who still set out his favorite coffee mug every morning. I moved through the house with the quiet efficiency of a long-practiced wife. I picked up his jacket from the arm of the sofa, ready to hang it in the closet. His wallet and keys fell out of the pocket, and his cell phone clattered onto the hardwood floor. The screen lit up. Usually, I'd just pick it up and place it on the charger, no questions asked. I'd trusted this man for 40 years. 40 years of building a life, a family, a home. We had a son, Leo, a wonderful man who was the light of my life. And Leo had given us Chloe, our daughter-in-law. Our family was supposed to be my fortress, but that floral perfume was a crack in the foundation. The phone screen was still glowing. An email notification was displayed on the lock screen. That was strange. Mark hated email. He was old school. "Clara, just call them," he'd always say. "All this typing and clicking gives me a headache." But there it was. A new message, sitting there like an uninvited guest. My heart started a low, heavy drumbeat in my chest. I told myself to put the phone down. To walk away. To not be that kind of wife. But that floral scent was still hanging in the air, whispering poison in my ear. With a trembling thumb, I swiped up. The phone wasn't locked. It never was. Why would he need to lock it? He had me, his trusting, dependable Clara. The email was open. It was short. Just a few words that would detonate the world I knew. "You were incredible tonight." DAD.IT was followed by a single red heart emoji. A tiny, digital symbol of affection that felt like a shard of glass in my own heart. I froze. The air left my lungs. My hand was shaking so badly the words on the screen blurred. I read it again. And again. "Dad," the word echoed in the suffocating silence of my living room. Dad. Who would be calling my husband, Mark, Dad? And in that tone? That intimate, post-coital, glowing review kind of tone? My mind was scrambling, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was a joke? A weird nickname from a client? But the red heart. The word incredible. No. This felt wrong. Bone deep wrong. My thumb, acting of its own accord, scrolled down, desperate for more information, for a name, a signature, anything. But there was nothing. Just a bizarre, cryptic email address. A jumble of letters and numbers that looked like someone had just smashed their hands on a keyboard. It offered no answers, just a black hole of more questions. I looked toward the bedroom. I could hear Mark let out a sputtering snore, blissfully asleep, his face peaceful in the dim light from the hallway. The contrast between his calm and the hurricane tearing through me was so stark it made me want to scream. I quickly placed the phone back on the end table, my movements jerky, clumsy. I felt like a criminal, but I wasn't the one who had committed a crime. I went back to his jacket. My hands were on autopilot as I started checking the pockets, a habit from years of laundering his clothes. Tissues, a pen, a few loose mints. And then, my fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. It was stiff, glossy. A receipt. I unfolded it under the lamplight. It was from a high-end steakhouse in San Antonio, dated for that very evening. My brow furrowed. San Antonio? He had told me his big meeting was in Dallas. He'd complained all week about the 3-hour drive to Dallas. But San Antonio was in the opposite direction. San Antonio was where his mother had lived. It was a place full of memories for him, a fact he'd always used to get out of visiting when she was alive. Too many ghosts, he'd say. So who was he dining with in a city full of ghosts, while lying to me about being in Dallas? I scanned the details on the receipt. Party of 2. 1 bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, the same wine he had bought me for our 20th anniversary, a night I remembered so vividly. The way the candlelight danced in his eyes. The way he'd toasted to another 20 years. Now that memory felt tainted, like a photograph left out in the rain. The main courses were a filet mignon and a lobster pasta. I tried to remember the last time Mark had taken me somewhere that fancy. It must have been 10, maybe 12 years ago. For my 50th birthday. He'd made a big show of it, but even then, he'd rushed through dinner, anxious to get home to watch some game on TV. Now, here he was, whining and dining some mystery person in another city, with a resolve I didn't know I had. I took out my own phone. My hands were still shaking, but I managed to hold them steady enough to snap a crystal clear photo of the receipt. Then, I went back and took a picture of the email on his phone screen. Evidence. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But a primal part of my brain, the part that had been dormant for 40 years of comfortable trust, was screaming at me to document everything. A woman's intuition is a powerful thing. A wife's intuition, honed over decades, is practically a superpower. And my intuition was telling me I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was crumbling beneath my feet. I hung up his jacket, my movements robotic. The faint, sweet smell of that perfume clung to the fabric. I felt an urge to throw it in the fireplace, but I resisted. I needed to be smart. I needed to be calm. I walked through the quiet house and out into the garage. Mark's SUV was still warm, the air thick with the smell of its engine, and there it was again. That perfume. Fainter, but definitely there. I opened the passenger side door. A cold knot was tightening in my stomach. Using my phone's flashlight, I scanned the interior. It looked clean. Too clean, almost. Like someone had made an effort to tidy up. Then I opened the glove compartment. My fingers brushed against a small, plastic tube. It was smooth and slippery. I pulled it out and the beam of my flashlight fell on the label, personal lubricant. My breath hitched. My heart, which I thought couldn't possibly beat any faster, felt like it was going to hammer its way out of my chest. I stared at the tube. It wasn't new. The cap was slightly loose, and there was a small amount of dried, sticky residue around the opening. It was damning. It was disgusting. It was irrefutable. Mark and I hadn't been intimate in, God, I couldn't even remember. Years. At least 5. He always had an excuse. He was tired from work. His back was acting up. He was getting old. Age had stolen his desire, he claimed. I had accepted it. It hurt, but I accepted it as another unfortunate reality of growing older together. So what in the hell was this for? The question wasn't a question. It was an accusation. And it was screaming in the silence of my garage. For a moment, I was paralyzed. I just stood there, staring at this greasy, plastic tube that represented the total annihilation of my marriage. Then, a strange clarity washed over me. The shaking stopped. My breathing evened out. This was not the time to fall apart. This was the time to think. I carefully placed the tube back exactly where I had found it. I wiped my fingerprints off it with the hem of my shirt. I closed the glove compartment. I didn't want him to know I knew. Not yet. Knowledge was power, and right now, it was the only power I had. I continued my search, now with a grim, methodical purpose. I checked under the seats. In the back, tucked deep under the passenger seat, I found them. A small wad of crumpled cocktail napkins. I pulled them out. They were from the same steakhouse in San Antonio. And they were saturated with that same sweet, floral perfume. The scent was so strong now it made me feel nauseous. It was an alien scent in my life, a vulgar declaration of war in the quiet sanctuary of our shared space. I took photos of everything. The tube of lubricant. The perfumed napkins. Each click of my phone's camera felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of my marriage. I closed the car door, the sound echoing in the silent garage, and went back inside. The weight of what I'd found was a physical thing, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I sat at my kitchen table, the photos glowing on my phone screen, and looked at the life I had built. The photos on the fridge of our son, Leo, and his wife, Chloe, at their wedding. The little clay handprint Leo had made in kindergarten, framed on the wall. The old, ticking clock from my mother, a wedding gift, now sounding like a countdown to an explosion. My marriage wasn't just cracking. It had been hollowed out from the inside, and I was the last one to know. The rage began to build then. It wasn't a hot, screaming rage. It was a cold, hard, quiet rage. The kind that doesn't just want to yell. The kind that wants to plot. I knew I couldn't confront him. Not like this. He would lie. He was clearly a very, very good liar. He would twist it, turn it back on me, call me crazy, jealous, paranoid. I'd seen him do it to his business partners. He could charm his way out of anything. No, I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. I needed a name. I needed a face. The next morning, the sun rose just as it always did, casting soft light through the kitchen blinds. I had been awake all night, a ghost haunting my own home. I moved through the motions of our morning routine, a performance I had perfected over 40 years. I made the coffee, strong and black, just how he liked it. I toasted the bread. I fried the eggs. Mark came downstairs, looking rumpled and tired. He slumped into his chair at the table and reached for his coffee mug without even looking at me. "I've got another important meeting today," he said, his voice husky with sleep. "Might be a late one." The casual ease with which the lie rolled off his tongue made my blood run cold. He was a master craftsman of deceit. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the hot coffee in his face and demand to know who he was meeting, who he was buying expensive wine for, who he was using personal lubricant with in his car, but I just smiled. A tight, strained smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "All right, dear," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "Drive safe." He gave my shoulder a light, dismissive pat on his way out the door. It was a gesture he might give to a dog, or a piece of furniture. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silence once more, but this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with my suspicion, which was hardening into a monstrous certainty. I couldn't just sit here and let this poison eat me from the inside out. I needed a professional. I thought of my old friend, Sharon. We had helped each other get our small businesses off the ground decades ago, me with my bakery, her with her flower shop. I remembered a conversation we'd had a few years back. After her own messy divorce. "Clara, if you ever suspect anything, and I pray you never do," she had said. Her voice low and serious, "I've got the number of a guy. A private investigator. He's discreet, he's relentless, and he finds out everything. His name is Mr. Croft." I had felt a pang of pity for her then, never imagining in a million years I would be the one needing that number. But life has a funny way of humbling you. I picked up my phone, my hands trembling again, and dialed her number. With each ring, my heart hammered against my ribs. "Sharon?" I said, when she answered. "It's Clara. I need that number. The one you told me about." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence that spoke volumes. She didn't ask questions. A good friend knows when not to. "Of course," she said softly. "I'll text it to you right now. Are you okay?" "I just need to know the truth," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Whatever it is." An hour later, I was sitting in a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop downtown. The air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, smells that usually brought me comfort, but today they just felt alien. I had chosen a booth in the darkest corner, feeling like a fugitive. Mr. Croft walked in at precisely noon, just as he said he would. He wasn't what I expected. He wasn't a hard-boiled detective from a film noir movie. He was a short, unassuming man in his 50s with kind eyes and a tired-looking tweed jacket. He looked more like a history professor than a private eye. He sat down opposite me and gave me a small, reassuring nod. "Mrs. Adams," he said, his voice quiet and calm. "Sharon said you needed my help." I pushed a small flash drive across the table toward him. On it were the photos I had taken. The receipt. The email. The lubricant. The napkins. "This is everything I have," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I think my husband is cheating on me." Saying the words out loud made them real. It was like finally admitting to a terminal illness. Mr. Croft plugged the flash drive into a small tablet and reviewed each image, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He took notes in a tiny, leather-bound notebook. "I understand," he said, looking up at me. His eyes full of a weary empathy that told me he had sat in this exact seat. Across from a woman who looked just like me, hundreds of times before. I'll start surveillance on Mr. Adams this afternoon. I will be in touch the moment I have something concrete. Go home, Mrs. Adams. Act as you always do. Don't give him any reason to suspect a thing. I left that cafe feeling like I was floating outside my own body. 40 years. 40 years of shared dreams and inside jokes and holding his hand in the dark at the movies. 40 years of believing I was one half of a whole. And now I was paying a stranger to follow the man I had pledged my life to. I knew, deep down, what Mr. Croft was going to find. I thought I was prepared for it. I thought the worst part was the not knowing, the suspicion. I had no idea that the truth was going to be 1,000 times more brutal than anything my broken heart could have ever imagined. The days that followed my meeting with Mr. Croft were some of the longest of my life. I was living in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of a life that no longer felt real. Every morning, I'd get up, go to the bakery, and greet my staff with a smile that felt like a cheap mask. The smell of yeast and sugar, a scent that had been my life's comfort for 40 years, now did nothing to soothe the cold, writhing knot of anxiety in my stomach. I would knead dough with a force that surprised even me, channeling all my fear and anger into the simple, repetitive motion. At home, I played the part of the devoted wife. I'd ask Mark about his day, and he would spin elaborate tales about difficult negotiations and incompetent colleagues. He was a phenomenal actor. He'd look me right in the eye, his face a perfect picture of marital boredom and work fatigue, and lie. He'd lie about where he'd been, who he'd seen, and what he'd done. And I would nod and listen, my heart a block of ice in my chest, and say things like, "That sounds stressful, dear," or "Maybe things will be better tomorrow." Every vibration of my phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. I'd snatch it up, my heart pounding, expecting a message from Mr. Croft. For 3 days, there was nothing but spam emails and texts from my son, Leo. "Hey mom, just checking in. Love you." Each message from him was a fresh stab of guilt. He was a good son. A wonderful, loving man who adored his wife, Chloe. He thought he had the perfect family. He had no idea that his father and his wife were conspiring to shatter his entire world. How could I ever tell him? The thought of the pain it would cause him was almost as unbearable as my own. On the 4th night, as I was sitting at the bakery's small office desk, going over invoices and trying to focus on the numbers, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. A text message. "Mrs. Adams. I have something. Check your email." CME breath caught in my throat. I fumbled with my laptop, my fingers suddenly clumsy and useless. I pulled up my email, and there it was. An email from an encrypted address. Subject, Update 1. I clicked it open. There was very little text. Just a single sentence: "Mr. Adams had dinner this evening at the Gilded Steer." Below it was an attachment. A single photograph. My hand trembled as I downloaded the image. It was a long-distance shot, clearly taken with a powerful lens from across the street. But the quality was impeccable. It was Mark, in the light blue shirt he wore when he wanted to look his best, sitting at a candlelit table for 2. He was holding up a glass of red wine, a smile on his face. Not his usual tired, dismissive smile, but a genuine, happy smile. The kind of smile he hadn't given me in years. Across from him, there was a woman. Her back was mostly to the camera, but I could see she had long, dark hair. She was wearing a sleek black dress. Even from this distance, I could feel the intimacy between them. The way their bodies were angled toward each other, the way his eyes were fixed on her. They didn't look like a boss and his subordinate, or 2 colleagues having a work dinner. They looked like lovers. I stared at the back of her head, at the curve of her shoulder. I tried to see a face, to put an identity to the person who had so casually destroyed my life. But I couldn't. She was just a silhouette, a faceless homewrecker. A part of me was almost relieved. As long as she was a stranger, I could contain my rage. I could direct it at this anonymous woman, this cliché. I saved the photo to the flash drive, which I now carried with me everywhere, like a dark talisman. I replied to Mr. Croft's email with a single word: continue. The next 2 days were more of the same torturous waiting. Then, on Saturday afternoon, another email arrived. Subject, Update 2. This time, there were more attachments. A series of photos, and a short video file. My heart was doing a frantic, painful dance against my ribs. I closed the blinds in my office, even though it was the middle of the day. I didn't want anyone to see my face when I looked at these. I opened the first photo. It was Mark again. He was in his SUV, parked in what looked like an underground garage. In the passenger seat was the same woman from the restaurant. This time, I could see her profile. She was younger, maybe in her late 20s or early 30s. She was laughing at something he'd said, throwing her head back. I zoomed in, and the world stopped. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a secretary or some random woman he'd met. It was Chloe. My son's wife. My daughter-in-law. The woman I had welcomed into my family with open arms. The woman I had taught how to make my mother's signature flan recipe, the one our family made for every single holiday. The woman who called me Mom. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the desk. A wave of nausea so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thick and hot, like I was suffocating. This wasn't possible. It had to be a mistake. A trick of the light. A woman who just looked like Chloe, with a shaking hand. I picked the phone back up and opened the next photo. This one was even clearer. They were standing outside, in front of a modern-looking office building. Mark had his hand on the small of her back. Chloe was looking up at him, a wide, adoring smile on her face. Her makeup was heavier than usual, her lipstick a bold, defiant red. It was her. There was no doubt. It was my Chloe. My mind started to flash through memories. Family dinners where Mark and Chloe would barely speak to each other. They always seemed so awkward, so distant. Leo would joke about it. "I don't think Chloe can stand Dad," he'd say with a laugh. "She avoids him like the plague." I see it now. It wasn't awkwardness. It was a performance. A masterful, carefully choreographed act for our benefit. They were so good. So convincing. How long had this been going on? Right under our noses. Right under my son's nose, the bitter taste of bile rose in my throat. I felt a rage so pure and so white-hot that it momentarily burned away the pain. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a violation of the most sacred trust. This was a level of cruelty I didn't know human beings were capable of. My finger, moving as if controlled by someone else, tapped on the video file. It began to play. I didn't want to watch, but I couldn't look away. It was from the same underground garage. The video was shaky, filmed from a distance, but the audio was surprisingly clear. Mr. Croft must have used some kind of special equipment. Chloe's voice, sweet and melodic, filled my office. "So, did you look at the papers from the lawyer?" Mark's voice, a low rumble. "I did. It all looks straightforward. Once we get her to sign, everything transfers to the new holding company." "And she won't suspect a thing?" Chloe asked. "Clara?" Mark let out a short, dismissive laugh. A laugh I had never heard before. It was cold and cruel. "She trusts me completely. She thinks all this business stuff is too complicated for her. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her, as long as I tell her it'll save us money on taxes. The old hag is so predictable." The old hag, the words hit me like a physical blow. I flinched, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob. That's what he called me. That's what they called me, behind my back. The old hag. The woman who had given him 40 years of her life, who had raised his son, who had supported his every ambition. Chloe laughed. A light, tinkling sound that was suddenly the ugliest thing I had ever heard. "Perfect. And Leo?" "Leo doesn't have a clue," Mark said. "He thinks his dad is a saint and his wife is an angel. He'll be sad for a while, but he'll get over it. We'll make sure he's taken care of. But the bakery chain, that's ours." I slammed the laptop shut. I couldn't hear any more. I leaned forward, my head in my hands, and I finally let out a sound. It was a choked, guttural noise of pure agony. They weren't just cheating on me. They weren't just betraying my son. They were planning to steal my life's work. My bakery. I had started it from nothing. A tiny little shop with a second-hand oven and a dream. I remembered the early days, working 18-hour shifts, my hands raw from kneading dough. I remembered Mark, back then, telling me it was a silly hobby, that I should focus on being a wife. But I had persevered. I had built it, store by store, into a successful chain, a respected brand in our city. It was mine. Every brick, every recipe, every late night spent worrying about payroll. It was the one thing in my life that was truly, completely mine, and they were going to take it. With a few forged signatures and a lie about taxes. They were going to strip me of my legacy, my financial independence, my identity, and leave me with nothing. The pain was so immense, I thought it might actually kill me. I sat there in the dark of my office for a long, long time, feeling the waves of grief and rage wash over me. But as the hours passed, something began to change. The grief started to recede, like a tide going out. And what was left on the shore was hard, and cold, and sharp. It was rage. A deep, tectonic rage that settled into my bones. The kind of rage that doesn't scream or cry. The kind that clarifies. The kind that focuses the mind. They thought I was a predictable old hag. They thought I was a fool who would just sign her life away. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. My trust for stupidity. That was going to be a fatal mistake. I opened my laptop again. I watched the video. I looked at every photo. I burned their smiling, treacherous faces into my memory. I saved everything to the flash drive. I created a separate, password-protected folder. Evidence. My ammunition. I spent the rest of the weekend in a fugue state. I went to the farmer's market. I had coffee with Sharon. I went to Leo and Chloe's house for Sunday dinner. Sitting at their table, eating the roast chicken Chloe had made, watching her laugh and touch my son's arm, was the hardest thing I have ever done. I had to physically grip the sides of my chair to keep from lunging across the table. I looked at this beautiful young woman, this viper I had welcomed into my home, and I felt nothing but a cold, bottomless hatred. She asked me how the bakery was doing. "Oh, you know," I said, my voice impossibly light. "Busy as ever. Actually, Mark and I were just looking over some paperwork to restructure things. For tax purposes." I saw it. A tiny flicker in her eyes. A spark of triumph. She exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance with Mark, who was sitting at the head of the table. "Oh, that's so smart," she said, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "You and Mark are so good with that stuff. It's all so complicated." "Yes," I said, taking a slow sip of water. "It is." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to the snoring monster I had been married to for 40 years, and I planned. The initial shock had worn off, and my baker's mind, the mind that could juggle a dozen different recipes and delivery schedules at once, was now focused on a single, complex recipe. Revenge. A simple divorce was not enough. Exposing the affair wasn't enough. They didn't deserve to just quietly slink away. They deserved to be humiliated. They deserved to have their world detonated, just as they had detonated mine. They wanted to take everything from me in secret. I was going to take everything from them in public. The plan started to form, piece by piece. It needed to be dramatic. It needed to be undeniable. It needed to be poetic, and then I thought of it. The piece of evidence that had started it all. The first tangible proof of their sordid little secret. The tube of personal lubricant in the glove compartment of Mark's car. It was the symbol of their betrayal. The tool of their deceit. And it was going to be the instrument of their downfall. The next day at the bakery, while waiting for a large batch of croissants to proof, I was in the back storeroom, looking for a spare mixer attachment. My eyes landed on a shelf where we kept our repair supplies. And there it was. A tube of clear, industrial-strength superglue. The kind we use to repair cracked floor tiles or fix the leg of a wobbly prep table. The warning label on the side read, "Bonds instantly. Use with extreme caution. Will bond skin on contact." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the first time I had smiled in a week. That night, I waited until I was sure Mark was in a deep, wine-induced sleep. His car keys were on the nightstand, right where he always left them. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. I slipped out of bed, my movements silent, and took the keys. I went to the garage, the concrete cold beneath my bare feet. I opened his SUV. That sickly sweet perfume still lingered in the air, a ghost of their last tryst. I opened the glove compartment. The tube of lubricant was still there. Of course it was. They were arrogant. Careless. They thought they were untouchable. I took the tube back to the kitchen. Under the dim light over the sink, I performed my grim little operation. I carefully squeezed the entire contents of the lubricant tube into the drain. Then, I washed it out thoroughly, making sure no residue was left. I dried it carefully. Then, I picked up the tube of industrial superglue. My hands were perfectly steady. I punctured the seal and slowly, meticulously, squeezed the clear, viscous glue into the empty lubricant tube until it was completely full. It looked identical. The consistency was almost the same. No one would ever know the difference. Not until it was far, far too late. I screwed the cap back on, wiped the outside of the tube clean of any fingerprints, and returned to the garage. I placed the doctored tube back into the glove compartment, right where I had found it. I closed the door, locked the car, and put the keys back on the nightstand. Mark stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent. I stood there for a moment, looking at the man I had spent my life with. He was a stranger to me now. A monster hiding in plain sight. They thought I was a predictable old hag. They were about to find out how unpredictable I could be. They had used that tube to tear my family apart. I was going to use it to fuse them together in a public spectacle of humiliation they could never, ever escape. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the rats to walk into it. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in deception. On the surface, I was the perfect wife, slowly coming to terms with the idea of a quiet retirement. I started talking about taking a vacation, maybe a cruise to Alaska, something I knew Mark would hate. I'd mention it casually over dinner, watching him out of the corner of my eye. "Wouldn't that be nice, dear? Just the two of us, seeing the glaciers." He'd give a non-committal grunt. "Sure, Clara. We'll look into it." But I could see the panic in his eyes. The last thing he and Chloe wanted was for me to be around more. They wanted me gone. And I was about to give them exactly what they thought they wanted. The following week, I fabricated a story about a new business opportunity. A gourmet food distributor in Nashville was interested in carrying my pastries nationwide. It was a huge deal, I explained, something that could set us up for life. It would require a trip, just for a couple of days, to finalize the contracts. Mark's reaction was exactly what I'd hoped for. He was practically vibrating with excitement, poorly disguised as husbandly support. Nashville. He boomed, his voice full of fake enthusiasm. Clara, that's fantastic. You have to go. Don't worry about a thing here, I'll hold down the fort. That little spark in his eye, that almost imperceptible smirk, told me everything I needed to know. The fort would be held down, all right. And the enemy would be invited right inside the gates. The night before my trip, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. I told Mark I was exhausted and needed to get to bed early for my morning flight. I have to be at the airport by 6, I said, giving him a quick peck on the cheek that felt like kissing a snake. I'll try not to wake you. He nodded, already engrossed in the TV. Rest up, hon. Go make us proud. I lay in bed, my eyes closed, my breathing even and slow. I listened to the sounds of the house, every creak and groan familiar. Around midnight, just as I knew he would, Mark slipped out of bed. The faint blue light of his phone screen illuminated his path as he crept out of the bedroom. I waited a full minute, my heart a steady, cold drum, then I rose and followed him. I hid in the shadows of the hallway, by the thick velvet curtains my mother had helped me pick out 30 years ago. I could see him standing by the living room window, his back to me, the phone pressed to his ear. He was whispering, his voice low and urgent. It's all clear, he said. She's leaving at the crack of dawn. The house is ours for the whole day. I heard a faint, happy giggle from the other end of the line. Chloe. Finally, she purred. No more sneaking around in cheap hotels. I can't wait to see you, Dad. Come over around 10, Mark replied, his voice thick with a desire that made my stomach turn. I'll be waiting. My blood was boiling, but my hands were steady. I slipped back into the bedroom. In my dresser, buried beneath old sweaters, was my son Leo's old digital voice recorder from his college days. I had put fresh batteries in it that afternoon. I turned it on, ensuring it was set to continuous record, and slid it deep behind a row of books on the nightstand bookshelf, right next to the headboard. I angled it just so, then placed a framed photo in front of it, obscuring it completely. It was a photo of the four of us, me, Mark, Leo, and Chloe, at their wedding. We all looked so happy. Such a perfect, beautiful lie. I got back into bed, my work done for the night. Mark came back a few minutes later and slid under the covers, reeking of treachery. He was snoring in minutes. But I lay awake in the darkness, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling and waiting for the dawn. At 5 a.m., long before the sun was up, I was in the kitchen. The house was dead quiet except for Mark's rhythmic snoring upstairs. This was the final, most crucial step. I took out a heavy skillet and poured a generous amount of cooking oil into it, about half an inch deep. I placed it on the back burner of our gas stove. Then, I took a long piece of high-tensile fishing line. I tied one end securely to the stove's ignition knob. I carefully threaded the other end up and over the open kitchen window, and attached it to a heavy, unopened can of coffee that I'd placed on the outside ledge. It was a simple, rudimentary trigger. A firm tug on the line from a distance would turn the knob, the igniter would spark, and the oil in the pan would catch fire. It wouldn't burn the house down. I'd tested it with a tiny amount of oil the week before, but it would produce an ungodly amount of thick, black, terrifying smoke. Enough to cause a panic. Enough to bring the fire department. I checked my handiwork one last time. It was perfect. I grabbed my pre-packed suitcase, a prop for my performance, and went upstairs. I gently shook Mark's shoulder. Mark, honey, I'm leaving for the airport now. He grunted, his eyes barely opening. Okay? Be careful, Clara. Call me when you land. He rolled over, burying his face in his pillow, already drifting back to his treacherous dreams. I looked at the man in my bed one last time. The stranger. And then I walked out. I didn't go to the airport. I walked across the street, to my neighbor Mrs. Gable's house. She was a sweet widow in her 70s, and my closest friend in the neighborhood. I had called her the day before, telling her I had a terrible feeling about leaving the house empty, a silly premonition about a fire. I asked if I could sit with her for a few hours in the morning, just to put my mind at ease before heading to a later flight. She, of course, agreed immediately. She let me in, her face etched with concern. Clara, you look pale. Is everything all right? Just nerves, I lied, forcing a smile. She sat me down in a comfortable armchair in her living room, a chair that had a perfect, unobstructed view of my front door. She handed me a cup of hot coffee, her hand patting mine reassuringly. And so we sat. And we waited. At precisely 10:03 a.m., a taxi pulled up in front of my house. Chloe got out. She was wearing a light, floral sundress and oversized sunglasses, a pathetic attempt to hide her identity. She looked around furtively before hurrying to the front door. The door opened before she could even knock. Mark pulled her inside, his movements quick and greedy, and the door slammed shut. I gripped my coffee cup, the ceramic hot against my cold fingers. It's time, I whispered to myself. I pulled out my phone and opened a special app that connected to a small Bluetooth speaker I had paired with the digital recorder in the bedroom. It wasn't perfect, but it allowed me to listen in. I put in my earbuds, the sounds of their reunion filled my ears. Chloe's breathless laughter. The clinking of wine glasses. Mark's deep, lustful voice. Finally, he murmured. No more hiding. You have no idea how much I've missed you, she cooed. Is the old hag really gone? I bit down hard on my lip, the insult still finding a way to wound me. I listened as their footsteps moved upstairs, toward my bedroom. Our bedroom. The creak of the bed springs was a sound I knew well, but now it sounded obscene, a soundtrack to the ultimate desecration of my home and my life. I didn't want to listen to what came next, but I had to. I had to know when the moment was right. Minutes passed. And then I heard it. A sudden, sharp scream from Chloe. What the hell is this? She shrieked, her voice a cocktail of confusion and pain. Mark. We're stuck. I can't move. Mark's voice was a low growl of panic. What are you talking about? Stop messing around. I'm not messing around. She sobbed. It's like we're glued together. Oh my God, it burns. A cold, triumphant smile touched my lips. The trap had sprung. I calmly set my coffee cup down. My hands were perfectly steady. On a second phone, a cheap burner phone I'd bought for this single purpose, I had an app that controlled a small, remote-controlled winch motor, the kind used for hobbyist projects. The motor was in my garage, and the fishing line was attached to it. I pressed a single button on the screen. Across the street, the line pulled taut. The knob on my stove turned. The igniter clicked. The pan of oil erupted into a plume of greasy, black smoke. It poured out of the kitchen window, a thick, rolling cloud that billowed into the clear morning sky. Mrs. Gable gasped. Clara. Your house. It's on fire. I feigned a look of horror, my hand flying to my mouth. Oh my God. Neighbors were already running out of their houses. Call 911. Someone screamed. Mr. Henderson from 2 doors down was already on his phone, his voice frantic as he relayed our address to the dispatcher. Through my earbuds, the scene in the bedroom was pure chaos. Chloe was screaming hysterically now, a raw, terrified sound. Mark, do something. The fire alarm is going off. I smell smoke. Shut up. Just shut up and let me think. He roared, but his voice was shaking. They were trapped. They were terrified. And their private little hell was about to become a very, very public one. Less than 5 minutes later, I heard it. The beautiful, terrible shriek of a fire truck's siren. The massive red engine came roaring down our quiet street and skidded to a halt in front of my house. The doors flew open, and firefighters began swarming out, pulling hoses and equipment, and then I saw him. Leading the team, his face set in a grim, professional mask, was my son. My Leo. In his fire chief's uniform. A sharp, unexpected pain shot through me. This was the one part of the plan that I knew would be devastating. My son, my beautiful, good-hearted son, was about to walk into a nightmare. He was about to see a truth so ugly it would scar him forever. For a moment, my resolve wavered. But then I thought of them, in my bed, calling me an old hag and plotting to steal everything from me and from him. No. This had to be done. Possible victims inside. Leo shouted, his voice ringing with authority. Let's move. He and another firefighter used a battering ram to smash down the front door. The sound of splintering would echo down the street. They disappeared inside. The crowd of neighbors was growing, a small army of onlookers, all with their phones out, recording. In my ears, I heard the heavy, thudding boots of the firefighters moving through the house. I heard them break down my bedroom door. And then, I heard my son's voice. But it wasn't the voice of a fire chief anymore. It was a small, broken whisper. What is this? There was a moment of stunned silence, then a muffled snort of laughter from one of the other firefighters. Silence. Leo roared, and the pain in that single word was so profound it brought tears to my eyes. This wasn't just an order to his men. It was a desperate cry to the universe to make this not be real. A firefighter came jogging out the front door. Chief, the fire is contained. Just a pan of oil on the stove. No structural damage. But Leo didn't answer. He was still in that room, frozen, staring at the wreckage of his life. The whispers in the crowd were starting to swell as people pieced things together. Wait, isn't that his daughter-in-law's car? Where's Clara? I thought she was out of town. Then, the paramedics arrived. And a moment later, the firefighters emerged from the house, carrying 2 stretchers. On them, tangled together in a humiliating, inseparable embrace, were Mark and Chloe. They were covered only by a single, thin white sheet that did little to hide their predicament. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in Mark's shoulder. Mark's face was ashen, his eyes wide with a shame so complete it was almost pathetic. The crowd gasped as one. Phones were held higher. Mrs. Gable, bless her heart, was recording the whole thing, a grim look of righteous fury on her face. The murmurs turned into loud, shocked exclamations. Is that his father? With his wife? Oh, my God, how disgusting. Poor Clara. Poor Leo. They were loaded into the ambulance, a spectacle of shame. As the doors slammed shut, I saw my son. Leo stood alone in the middle of the yard, his arms hanging limply at his sides. His face was a pale, expressionless mask, but his eyes? His eyes looked like they had seen the end of the world. I walked over to him, my heart aching. Leo, I said softly. He turned to look at me, and his mask crumbled. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. How? I'll explain everything, I said, putting my arm around him. But first, we have some papers to deliver. At the hospital, after a doctor had explained with a grim face that they had managed to surgically separate them, I enacted my final, petty revenge. I'd been given their prescription ointment for the chemical burns. In the bathroom, I'd squeezed it all out and refilled the tubes with the hottest Dijon mustard from my bakery's pantry. I left the tubes on their bedside tables with a little note, get well soon. Their screams a few minutes later were music to my ears. Then, I walked back in, with Leo at my side. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I placed a thick folder of evidence on the table between their beds, Mr. Croft's photos, the audio recordings, copies of their plot to steal my company. On top of the folder, I placed 2 documents. Divorce papers. Sign them, I said, my voice cold and steady. You will walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back. You will never contact me, or my son, ever again. Chloe started to sob, looking at Leo. Leo, honey, I am so sorry. Please, it was a mistake. Leo just stared at her, his eyes empty of any emotion at all. He didn't say a word. His silence was her answer. A few weeks later, the video Mrs. Gable had taken was ancient history, but its effects lingered. Mark and Chloe left town, shamed and disgraced. My bakery, however, was busier than ever. The story had spread, and the community rallied around me. They called me a hero, a legend. They didn't see the broken pieces inside me, the 40 years of my life that had been a lie. Leo moved in with me. The first few months were quiet. We worked side by side at the bakery, finding a new rhythm. We were both wounded, both healing. But we were doing it together. One night, as we were closing up shop, he turned to me. That flan recipe Chloe used to make, he said, his voice quiet. I miss it. The one Grandma used to make. I smiled, a real, genuine smile. I can teach you, I said. It's a family recipe. He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of the old light back in his eyes. I had lost a husband, but I had reclaimed my life. I had my son, I had my bakery, and I had my self-respect. The fire was out, the smoke had cleared, and in the ashes of my old life, something new was beginning to grow. And that's where Clara's new chapter began. It's amazing how the most painful endings can sometimes lead to the strongest new beginnings. I'd love to hear what you all think about this down in the comments. What part of Clara's story stood out to you the most? Do you think her revenge was justified, or did it go too far? So many of us have faced betrayal in our lives, and if you feel comfortable sharing, I know our community here would be honored to listen to your own stories of resilience. If this story resonated with you, giving it a like is a huge and wonderful way to support the channel and helps more people find these stories of strength. And of course, if you want to make sure you never miss another story, please consider subscribing. We have new ones coming out all the time, and I'd love for you to be here for them. Thank you so much for being here and sharing this time with me. I hope this story serves as a reminder that even after the deepest betrayals and the loudest chaos, there is always a path to peace and a new beginning waiting for you. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.